how to do the circular tubular cast on to set up 2x2 rib. So there's a different video on the site for how to set up 1x1 rib. This is for 2x2. But you can see, just like the other one, it's a very invisible seam. It just kind of rolls into itself. Like the other one, there are a number of steps involved, but it's very stretchy, very beautiful when you're done, so I think it is worth it. Here's what you need. You need a crochet hook and some scrap yarn and a contrasting color for your project yarn to get started. And then you need your project yarn. And then I like to do this with 2 sets of circular needles. This is the one I'm going to use for my hat using magic loop. And so these are in the correct size needle for my 2x2 rib section. And then I have another circular needle. It can just be short, has to be at least the circumference of your project, but doesn't have to be any longer than that. And I'm using 1 needle size smaller. Okay. So I'm going to start with that one, and we're going to use a provisional cast on. Remember that whenever you do provisional cast on, you start by tying a knot in the very end, and then you go up an inch or so and you tie a slip knot. And that way you remember that you do not untie the knot end when it's time to take the provisional yarn out. Okay, so then just crochet a few. There are whole videos on the site on how to do this. And then you lay your knitting needle on top of the working yarn, and you reach, I kind of hold this with my, so I'm pinching both the tail of my crochet and the knitting needle in my left hand. The yarn is coming behind the back, and I reach my crochet hook over the front to pull through a loop. And then you have to move the working yarn back behind the knitting needle, reach the crochet hook on top, pull through a loop. Move the yarn behind, pull through a loop. So you keep doing that until you have half as many stitches as you need for your cast on. So if your cast on is 80 stitches, let's say for a hat, you would do 40 provisional cast on stitches. All right, when you have enough cast on stitches, then just crochet a few more, and then you can cut the yarn and pull it through, but don't pull it tight, okay? All right, now we're going to scoot those stitches over to the other end because we want to start now knitting into the end that has the slip knot. So we are done with the scrap yarn and the crochet hook. So now I'm picking up my needle that will be my needle for my project with my long cable for magic loop. And I'm going to start just by knitting into each of these provisional cast on stitches with my actual project yarn. And you just knit all the way across. Here I am at the end of my first row. And for the moment, I'm done with that smaller needle. So this is now my long needle that I'm going to be doing with magic loop. But for now, I'm not yet connecting it in a circle. I'm just going to turn the work. So I was knitting this way, I'm just turning it over, and I'm going to purl all the way across. Here I'm at the end of my purl row. I'm going to turn it around, flip it over just like usual, and I'm going to knit a row. So you're going to do a total of 4 rows. Knit off of the provisional cast on. So you did the provisional cast on, then you knit the first row, then turn over and purl, then turn over. This is the knit row. Then you're going to turn over and do 1 more purl row. Okay, turning over for my last purl row. Okay, so now I'm done with basically 4 rows of stockinette after my one little provisional cast on. Now we need to take out the provisional stitches and we're going to put them back on that little short spare needle. Remember, whenever you're doing provisional cast on, you do not untie the end with the knot. You untie the other end. You can unzip the first couple of stitches, but then be careful to make sure you see where the first loop is to pick up. So then you can just grab each one as you go across. Basically, I'm just putting my needle behind the right leg of each V. I'm just kind of ignoring my provisional cast on. After you've done a few, you can just unzip those stitches. You always have to pull it out of the first one. And keep picking them up until you're sure you've collected all of them. Okay, so I've been picked up, pulled off the last of my scrap yarn. Now, this is my working yarn coming off of here. So I have a little piece here. Right, my stockinette, picked up my provisional cast on. This needle is the real needle. It's attached to my long magic loop. So now what we do is we fold this in half. Okay, so this is the purl side. The purl side is getting tucked in, and actually I'm going to tuck that tail right in there too, in between the two sides of that little sandwich. Okay. And now I'm going to reach around with the long end of my magic loop circle, my magic loop circular needle, and I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches off the front needle. And now I'm going to bring the yarn to the front and purl the next 2 stitches off of the back needle. So you can see this is where we're setting up the 2x2 rib with 2 knit and then 2 purl. And this also explains why we only cast on half as many stitches, because we're really making up the rest right here. Okay. So I'm coming back to the front needle. I'm going to knit 2 off of the front needle. And I'm going to purl 2 off of the back needle. And you keep going like that all the way across. Okay, so here's my last purl, or sorry, my last knit. And then here are my last 2 purls. All right. So now you can see it's a very beautiful cast on, and if we're going to connect this into a circle for magic loop, as I'm pretending I am doing for this little mini scrap that would become a hat, you simply divide your stitches in half on your magic loop. My working yarn is coming off the back needle, that's the set I just finished. The front needle is pushing all the way through, so the tip is ready to work the stitches. And then you pull that back needle around. Remember to get your yarn kind of positioned. This last stitch was a purl, so it's kind of coming off the top, up and over, ready to do a knit. So now we're going to knit 2 and then purl 2. You just go all the way around, and you are completely set up now for your 2x2 rib. You can start to see how the 2x2 rib is forming, and that's really all there is to the circular tubular cast on for 2x2 rib. I'm going to finish these last 2 stitches and we'll stop and take a look, and then you'll be ready to go with your project. There you go. You can start to see how the 2x2 rib is starting to form. And then ultimately, it grows into this. I hope that helps. Happy knitting!